the egret here. It's a great egret. It's hunting for fish. Oh, he just caught a fish. Just a little fish. Just moving into the shallows now. Wow, so lucky. Oh, hello. I'm Charles from Charles and Photography. This morning I'm down here at Osprey House, taking some photos of some birds and all that. I was hoping for a few waders as the tide was coming in. No waders, but I did just get a really nice photo of an eastern great egret catching a little fish. But I'm just hoping for a few osprey photos when the ospreys are hunting, because the water is very shallow here in these mud flats, and this is the perfect time for the ospreys to actually be hunting out here for some food. But today's video, I really want to talk about how good the Nikon D7500 is paired to the Nikon 200-500mm f5.6 for wildlife photography. Now, I've had my Nikon D7500 here for about 2 years. Before that, I had a Nikon D750 full frame, and it was a great camera, but really wasn't suitable for wildlife. After an unfortunate accident with it where I lost the camera and the lens due to a mishap, I went looking for a new camera. At that time, I wasn't much into wildlife, but I knew it was something that I wanted to get into within the near future, because my daughter and I go walking a lot in parklands and all that, and she's also got a very keen sense of adoring wildlife. She's got a little point and shoot camera and to like walking around taking photos. So when I actually was looking for a newer camera, I decided not to go back to a full frame, but to go back to an APS camera, a crop sensor, so I could actually get much further out when I'm shooting wildlife. At the start, I just had my kit lens, a Nikon 18-140, then just to see if I could still shoot wildlife, because I suffer from a bit of the shakes, I bought a Nikon 80-400mm lens. Now, this lens is a really budget lens. I think I only paid about $180 on eBay, but it allowed me just to get the feel back into wildlife. It suffered a lot from chromatic aberration. I knew there was a lot of problems with it, but I just wanted a lens at the start just to see if I could do this again. After a couple of months of having a play with it, I said, yep, that's it. I've still got the knack for this stuff. So I went looking for a very good lens. Now, I read a lot of reviews and all that. And at the same time, I actually was at an air show at Caboolture Airport, and I bumped into a guy who's a very good friend of mine now. He had the Nikon D500 and he had paired it up to the Nikon 200-500. I know that D500 is in a totally different class to the D7500, but the pictures that I was seeing from it really sort of got me thinking that this would most likely be the best lens for it. So I rang him up and I said, hey Dave, you know, we don't live far from each other. Do you mind if we meet down at Lake Eden, and if I could just use your lens for about half an hour or so, walk around and see how good this lens is matched to my camera? So he agreed, and a couple of days later we went to Lake Eden and I paired it up. Just seeing the photos that I'd just taken, I knew that this was going to be the lens that I was wanting to get. A few days later we actually found out that JB had these on special for $1,600, so I went out and I bought it. So I've had it now for about 18 months. I just love this lens every day more and more. The pictures that I get from it matched up to my camera here are just amazing. And if you follow me, you would have actually seen a lot of my wildlife photos. Now, I love shooting kingfishers and all that, but the problem with kingfishers and a lot of time is you're shooting at least 10, 15 meters away. So you really need a very sharp lens. And the Nikon 200-500 here, matched up to a crop sensor camera, actually gives you a focal range of 300 to 750. So you've got a very good reach. And even at 500mm, the images are tack sharp, which is what I love about it. So to start off with, why do I love this D7500 so much? And also, what are some of the pitfalls? The predecessor to this camera would be the Nikon D7200. They've actually put a lot of features in here that are not the same as the 7200. To start with, it's a 21 megapixel crop sensor camera. It only has one card slot. Unlike all the predecessor of the D7000 series, I've never had card failure because I always buy good quality cards. So I end up buying the SanDisk 128 gig Extreme Pro card. I've had this card ever since I've had this camera for over 2 years now. Never had a failure. Now, something that I do religiously is when I get home, I back up all the photos from my card. Now, I don't move them to my computer, I copy them. Once they're all on my computer and I'm sure that every file has been correctly copied, now I go into the menu and I actually format the card. It's just like washing your clothes. So you end up with a clean card for the next time you go out. I don't believe in just deleting the photos, because when you're just deleting them, they're still on the card, they're just not seen. Whereas when you're formatting the card, you're giving it a very nice clean. You end up with a clean card, so the next time you go out, there is no data on that card. So you're sure that you're not going to get any file corruption. So let's start with some of the good points that I like about this camera. It has very good high ISO noise capabilities. Although I like shooting wildlife, I still like photographing astro, the Milky Way and all that. And I can easily shoot to ISO 6400 and get very clean images. And if I'm doing a time lapse of the Milky Way at night time, I can actually be shooting at ISO 8000. So let's go through the good and the bad on the D7500 and on the Nikon 200-500mm f5.6 lens. We'll start with the camera. The good, picture quality is outstanding. Like when I'm shooting astrophotography, the Milky Way and star trails and all that, I can go up to ISO 6400 without any problem at all. I can even go to ISO 8000 when I'm doing time lapses and all that, because of the amount of photos that I'm taking, and the digital noise is not really that noticeable. So I know that when I'm shooting wildlife, I can shoot between ISO 1600 and ISO 2000 quite comfortably. Now, I normally stop at ISO 2000 because for my wildlife photos, I like a very clean background, so I don't like too much noise. I could shoot up to ISO 4000 quite comfortably, but I just don't like noise. When we're shooting astro and all that, because it's a dark sky, we're not noticing the slight grain in our photos as much as if we were photographing wildlife and all that. High ISO capabilities is great. 8 frames a second on a camera like this is great. I'm very happy with that. It can shoot video, and the video quality here at 3800 something pixels wide is amazing. I've actually shot some video of some birds and all that, and a couple of weeks ago I shot some moorhens with their chicks. Yes, you have to have the camera on a tripod because I was out at 500mm, so any small shake and you actually see that in the video, but that's user beware, so you've actually got to set that up. If you're getting camera shake, it's not the camera that's causing that, it's you. But the picture quality, the color rendition, all that was just amazing. It has a tilt screen, so it comes out to 90 degrees, if you see it here, like that. Means when I'm down low, with a touch screen as well, so it's a tilt and touch screen. When I'm down low, if I'm photographing wildlife and all that, and I want to get that sort of bird's eye view of lizards and all that sort of stuff, I can actually just hold the camera very low, or on my little mini tripod that I've made, and here's a picture of it here. I've actually customized an old tripod, and it sits about 25 centimeters off the ground, so I can actually get a very nice horizontal view of the lizard. I'm right looking in his eyes, so I can actually just focus on his face, hit the touchscreen exactly where the lizard's head is, and bang, there's a photo. And you actually get amazing images, because without a touchscreen you've actually got to use the viewfinder. Other advantages, I find the camera is quite light. One of the features that it has is, I'll show it to you now, is here, the U1 and U2 modes. Now these modes are terrific. You have 2 of them. So I've actually set up the U1 mode for wildlife and the U2 mode for daytime landscape photography. I'll quickly run into how these modes work. Because they're a custom mode, they're a custom dial, you've actually got to program them. So for wildlife, we normally shoot in shutter priority. So went into shutter priority and I set up my whole camera how I would like the photos taken. So first I set up my shutter speed, 1/400th of a second, which means as soon as I dial into U1, it's set to 1/400th. I can increase it if I want, but the minimum shutter speed will be 1/400th. Then I set my white balance. Now, my white balance for wildlife is set to auto because light can change so quickly that I mightn't have time to actually program the right white balance that I want. If I was shooting landscape, I normally like to manually set my white balance. But for wildlife, auto white balance. Then I go in and I set up my metering mode, how I want the camera to meter. Do I want it matrix, do I want it center weighted, or do I want spot? For landscapes, it's great. Matrix metering, we're reading the whole frame. But for wildlife, I actually prefer spot or center weighted. It gives me a better chance of not blowing out the bird and all that and getting the correct exposure on whatever I'm photographing. So I set my metering. Then I go in and I also make sure that I'm shooting in RAW. Now, if you're shooting in JPEG, what you have to be mindful of is your white balance. White balance is the one thing that is very hard to adjust once you've taken a photo. So if you've set to JPEG, then instead of auto white balance, you might want to set a white balance preset. So most of the time during the day, you'll be safe if you actually just set it to daylight or to sunny, depending on the camera that you're using. But because I shoot in RAW, I can actually just set to auto, and I can get home, and if the photo's too warm or too cool, I can actually adjust my white balance to suit. Once all my settings here in the menu is all done, I go down to the bottom of the menu and I select the U1 mode and say save settings. So it will actually save all these settings to my U1 mode. So when I pick up my camera, if I've been shooting landscapes and all that, all I have to do is go to my U1 mode, and on the shooting dial here, change from single shot to continuous low or continuous high. Then this camera also has here, on the side here, down here, where we can select autofocus or manual focus, we actually touch the center of the button and we change from AFS, which is autofocus single, to AFC, which is autofocus continuous. So it means I can be tracking a bird and all that. And with autofocus continuous, if the bird's moving forward or back from me, it'll actually keep the bird in focus. So this is something that when you're shooting for wildlife, you definitely want to be doing. The only thing that I actually find I don't like, but I've gotten used to it, is it's not a 25 megapixel camera. It's only 21 megapixels. So I've actually lost 4 megapixel. Plus, it only has one card slot. Now, when this camera came out, a lot of people complained, it only has one card slot. What happens if the card fails? Well, in all honesty, I've had this camera here for 2 years, never had the card fail on me. So that's not been a problem. But the one thing you have to do is you buy yourself a good quality SD card. Now, I like and I use the SanDisk Extreme Pro 128 gig memory card. It is matched to this camera. It's like a match made in heaven. Now, these are the only two things losing from 25 megapixel to 21 and the single card slot that I could think of that are against this. The only other thing that I rarely used was on the previous cameras, we had a button at the front here where we could actually judge the depth of field. So if we pressed it, the camera would close down and we could see how much depth of field we had at the certain aperture we had. For wildlife, that's not a big deal, but when I do landscape photography, especially if I'm shooting something very close, even in macro, you would actually be sure of, you could actually see how much depth of field you had when you took the photo. So that's the only three things really that are missing. Now onto the lens. Now, I can't find too many things wrong with this lens, apart from it only goes to 500 compared to the Sigma and the Tamron. The Sigma and the Tamron will give you a reach of 150 to 600, whereas the Nikon here will only give you a reach between 2 and 500. But what I love about this is it's an f5.6 lens from 200mm to 500mm, whereas the Sigma and the Tamron will, once you're out to 500mm, you're shooting at f6.3, which means to get the same shot in the same condition, your ISO would actually be higher, or you would actually have to drop your shutter speed to get the same image. So that's the only thing. The stabilization in this lens is just amazing. Now there is two types of stabilization. You have normal and you have sports. Now, when I first got this camera, I was actually just shooting in normal. Everything was going good and all that. But about a month after I had the lens, we went down for a holiday on the Gold Coast and we went on a whale watching tour, and we were outside the seaway and there was a bit of a swell and I was missing a lot of the shots. Now, I quickly texted my mate who owned this lens and I said, listen, I'm just missing so many shots here. He said, listen, switch it over from normal to sports and you won't have a problem, because sports, it's designed for when you're sort of shaking, when you're moving about and all that. It'll give you better stabilization, but your shooting style might be down a little bit. So maybe instead of shooting at 8 frames a second, it might drop it down to 7 frames. So like, yeah, no problem at all. Change it to sport. Great. I got so many great whale photos of the whales breaching and all that. And since that day, that's it. It stayed on sport. I do know some people state that once you go over, let's say 1800th of a second or 1200th of a second, you really don't need VR on the lens. You can actually take it off to give you a fraction faster shooting speed, and you're not slowed down by the VR kicking in and out. I suffer from the shakes a bit, so I can't actually say if that works or not, but for me, I leave it in VR sports mode all the time. Whether I'm shooting at 400th of a second, 1,000th of a second, 2,000ths of a second, or sometimes if I'm trying to get a photo of the kingfishers leaving their nest and all that, I could be shooting up to 1,320th, 200th of a second. It'll still be in VR sports mode. It's there for a reason. We might as well use it. So this is what I love about this lens, that I can be shooting a kingfisher at 15 meters and it will be razor sharp. No complaints there. And there's a Facebook group, it's the Nikon 200-500 f5.6 group. If you look on there, if you're actually interested in buying this lens, just ask a question saying, how do you like this lens? You will rarely find one person complain about this lens. It is just so good. Now you can see here that I've actually got camo gear on there. It's really not so much ready to blend into the environment and all that. It does help sometimes, but the reason I put on there, and although this lens is moisture resistant and all that, so if you get a bit of rain on there, it won't go straight into the camera. It's advisable to wipe down water. But what it does do is protect the lens. So if I'm walking through the bush and all that, if there's any twigs and all that that are scraping, they're scraping on the camouflage. And if I'm out in the sun, it's the camo gear that's actually copping all the heat. Once it's faded and all that, I can just replace it for about $35, put some new stuff on. Or if it gets damaged, do the same. But if I ever want to sell this lens and go to another one, then I can just take all this camo gear off, and underneath it'll look like a brand new lens. So it'll help me in the resale value of this lens. So the two of them together is just, to me, it's a match made in heaven. You can pick up the D7500 now for around $1,500, the lens for around $1,800. So for just over $3,000, let's say $3,200, you've got a terrific setup for wildlife photography at a reasonable budget. That's my view on this lens and why it is so good. You can actually check on my Facebook page or on my Flickr account and you can see all the great photos that I've taken with this lens. I'll add just a couple of photos here and you'll actually see how good these photos are, and you can see here in these pictures. Can you see that even when I'm shooting at ISO 1600, the images are good. At ISO 100 to ISO 400, they are much better. So I hope this has helped you on why the Nikon D7500 and the Nikon 200-500mm f5.6 lens is such a good combination. If you like this video, give me a thumbs up or subscribe to my YouTube channel down here, and I'll see you next time. And stay tuned for my next video, which will be how to set up your D7500 and also how to set up back button focusing. I'll see you next time. This is Charles for Charles N Photography. Bye for now.